Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage Israel's ambassador to the United States, the Honorable Ron Dermer, and senior defense correspondent for Channel 10, Alon Ben David.
Good morning, everybody. We're delighted to have with us His Excellency Ambassador Dermer to have one of the closing sessions of this remarkable conference. It was this week, a year ago, November 9th, morning, I won't forget it was my birthday, when Donald J. Trump was declared US President. And I hope you would agree with me that never before Israel had such a friend at the White House.
I agree.
So tell us a little bit about that transition. What was it like for you as an ambassador to experience the transition from the Obama period to the new Trump administration?
Well, what I will tell you is, before being ambassador, I've been ambassador now for over 4 years. And I was 4 years in the Prime Minister's office before. So I worked from the beginning with the Obama administration on all the issues that have to deal with the U.S.-Israel relationship. So I saw that relationship up close. And there were things that we worked together on, and there are things that we appreciated. We were able to finalize an MOU agreement, a 10-year agreement of military assistance a few months before the end of Obama's tenure. But it is no secret that we had strong disagreements over very, very serious issues, the biggest of which was obviously the nuclear deal with Iran, which we, in case you didn't know, Israel opposed the nuclear deal with Iran, and Israel still opposes the nuclear deal with Iran. So
but
that was
in practical terms of access to the White House, access to the State Department.
Yeah, no, that wasn't a problem. It wasn't a lack of communication, and I think probably, I don't know if it's true, but I think that Obama maybe met Prime Minister Netanyahu more than he met any other foreign leader. So it wasn't a question of not getting our views across. It's that we disagreed. We disagreed on the role Iran was playing in the region. We did not think, as some people in the previous administration did, that Iran was part of the solution to problems in the Middle East. We thought that they were the problem in the Middle East. Almost everywhere you look, Iran is a problem. In Syria, Iran is the problem. In Iraq, they're the problem. In Lebanon, they're the problem. In Yemen, they're the problem. In Gaza, they're part of the problem. So we had a very big disagreement on that issue. We also had a big disagreement on the best way to advance peace with the Palestinians. And that's also not an unimportant issue. So on two major issues, we had a disagreement. And I actually think that the testament to the U.S.-Israel relationship is when you can have a stronger relationship despite those disagreements. I mentioned the issue of the MOU. There was intelligence sharing. There were many things, particularly on the security side, where we actually deepened our relations with the United States over the time. And things are tested under fire. And it's when we had these big disagreements that the U.S.-Israel relationship was getting stronger, which I think tells you everything you need to know about the U.S.-Israel relationship. I said 3 or 4 years ago, and I'll repeat it here, and this was when President Obama was president of the United States. Now we have, obviously, President Trump, and I agree with your assessment of his support for Israel. But I said that I believe Israel is going to be the most important ally of the United States in the 21st century. The most important ally of the United States in the 21st century. Now, Britain was the most important ally of the United States in the 20th century. But the reason why is because the security challenges facing the United States for the foreseeable future are going to emanate from the Middle East. Obviously, there's a huge problem of North Korea, but most of the major security challenges facing the United States are going to emanate from the Middle East. And you do not have another reliable partner that is democratic in that region. And to the extent that the United States does not want to send troops to the Middle East, and they don't, and I don't think this is different about President Trump, I think the importance of Israel as an ally of the United States grows. And the second thing is technology, where Israel really is a global technological power in agriculture and water, in cyber, now in autonomous vehicles. And if you think about who is the best partner for the United States around the world in keeping its own citizens safe and its allies safe on the security side, and also making its citizens more prosperous with all the technology that's happening in Israel. I think Israel is the most important ally of the United States, and I think the alliance will grow much stronger in the years ahead.
Let's hope so. We've heard a very, very interesting speech by President Trump on the issue of Iran a few weeks ago, basically not withdrawing.
I said that was the second best day since I've been ambassador.
Not withdrawing from the deal, but placing Iran under probation, saying we will not allow you to use loopholes on the issue of missiles. We will reconsider our position on the sunset clause. How would you define the Israeli interest? Would we rather have a no deal, an improved deal, or stay with the deal as it is?
Well, we definitely, the third one is definitely out. We definitely
Okay.
don't want to stay with the deal as it is. And people have to understand, this deal does not prevent Iran from developing nuclear weapons. This deal paves the path for Iran developing nuclear weapons. If this were a deal that actually blocked Iran from developing nuclear weapons, I, as Israel's ambassador, would have gone house to house throughout this country and anywhere else to convince people to support it. Why was Israel opposed to it? Because it doesn't block that path, it actually paves it. Because in a few years, the restrictions that the deal puts in place are automatically removed. And in those two words, automatically removed, you understand Israel's objection to the deal. So what you've heard in the last few weeks, when there was a debate over what President Trump would do, was Iran's not violating the deal. Iran's not violating the deal, so why should you end the deal? The problem is not whether Iran violates the deal or not. Because the Prime Minister, when he spoke to Congress 2 years ago, he said the greater danger is not that Iran is going to get to the bomb by violating it, it's going to get to the bomb by keeping it. So what this deal essentially did, it put all of us in a car on cruise control heading over a cliff.
I think
So we have to do everything we can to prevent us and the world from going off that cliff. Now, as to the question of those other two options, which are better? First, we don't know yet because we're going to have to see what the policy will be to try to improve it. Now, I personally don't think you're going to improve the deal by getting Iran to change anything, and I don't think the Russians and the Chinese will be on board for any fix. Why should Iran change the deal of the century from their point of view? But I do think it's possible for the United States to work with Europe, to work with Congress, to try to put fixes and to correct the deficiencies of the deal. You mentioned some of them. One is, what do you do about ballistic missiles? What do you do about an inspection regime? Iran's government is saying you cannot inspect military sites. They're openly saying that. Well, we know that's not true. Will Europe stand with the United States in making clear that that is not true, and that if Iran will not allow the inspection of military sites, that constitutes a meaningful violation of the deal? And the most important issue to fix is the automatic removal of these restrictions, the so-called sunset clause. I do think it's possible to get a fix. I wouldn't call it necessarily a better deal. I think it's possible to turn a bad deal into a good policy vis-a-vis Iran. I think that's possible, but I also think if you can't, then President Trump should walk away from this deal because it's a very bad deal for the security of Israel, I think for the security, certainly the security of the Arab states, the security of Europe, and ultimately for the security of the United States as well. And I give great credit to President Trump. And I think everyone should give great credit to President Trump because he could have kicked this can down the road. Because those restrictions will not come off during his tenure as President of the United States. Whether he's 4 years or 8 years, they will be beyond his presidency. And yet he decided to make the decision today and to change a policy which was effectively a policy of the United States accepting a nuclear-armed Iran down the line. It was a policy of containment and turn it back to a policy of prevention. And I think that's something that everybody who is concerned about the security of Israel should applaud.
So let's go down this avenue for a second. Assuming that Trump will walk away from the deal or that US Congress would employ new sanctions on Iran in a manner that would make Iran understand that the deal is worth nothing anymore, and realizing that we are talking about a deal which has 6 parties too, what happens? Won't we, Israel, be left alone with a US disengaged from the Middle East, and we will have to face a nuclear Iran by ourselves?
You mean Israel will be left alone with the United States of America?
No, I'm saying that the United
doesn't
States
sound
of
too alone
America
to
is
me.
has very little presence in the Middle East
Look,
today,
let
and
me-
it's diminishing by the day.
Look, first of all, I don't agree with some of the assumptions in your question. First, it's important thing you said the other 6 parties, the P5+1. Understand something. There were 2 agreements that were signed with Korea, with the North Koreans. There were 6-party talks. 2 of those parties were the Japanese and the South Koreans. They were at the negotiating table. So it's pretty hard to be critical of either the Clinton administration or the Bush administration, both of whom made deals with the North Koreans at the time, when America's allies in the region, the South Koreans and the Japanese, were practically begging the United States to do those deals. Now, what happened in the P5+1 talks? Israel wasn't there. The Arabs...
Only listening.
The Arabs were not there. We were not at the negotiating table. And we both oppose it. And someone once told me, if you're not sitting around the table, you're usually on the menu. We were not there. And that has, I think, great moral weight. And when Israel is saying this is a bad deal, when the Arab states said it privately, they didn't say publicly what they thought privately of the deal, but they see this deal as being a disaster. And I think that one part of your question was, you know, what does Iran get out of this deal? People think that what Iran gets out of this deal is the sanction relief. And they think, well, Iran gave on the nuclear side, and they got on the sanctions side. That's not true. Iran got on the nuclear side, and it got on the sanctions side, because it has a legitimate path to the bomb. And they will keep this deal as long as they think that that path to becoming a legitimate military nuclear power is theirs for the taking. And if the United States walks away, I'm not so sure that Iran is going to rush away, because they'll think that they still have that path. But if the United States walks away, it will give a lot less money to Iran. What people don't understand, you heard one of the previous speakers, who is a great friend of Israel, Congressman Royce, he said, well, the toothpaste is out of the tube. I disagree with that. I don't think the toothpaste is out of the tube. The money that you hear that Iran got, the $50 billion or $100 billion or $150 billion, that was money that was frozen in bank accounts, Iranian money, that their oil that they sold that they couldn't get back to Iran. But that's the small money. That is the signing bonus of the deal. The big money of this deal is year after year, where Iran is selling oil and getting investments that are coming into the country. When the interim agreement was signed in 2013, our estimate, Israel's estimate, were that the sanctions were costing Iran $100 billion every 18 months. Now, over a 15-year deal, that's $1 trillion that are going to go to Iran. And I guarantee you they're not going to use that money to establish a GI Bill for returning members of the Revolutionary Guard. They're going to use that money to fund Hezbollah, to fund the Shia militias in Iraq, to fund the Houthis in Yemen, to fund terror organizations against us, and to try to establish a permanent military presence against Israel in Syria. That's the big money. When you go from selling 1 million barrels a day of oil to 2.5 or 3 million barrels a day, that's the big money of the deal. And every day that this goes on without a change is a bad day for Israel, it's a bad day for our Arab neighbors, and I think it's a very bad day for the world.
And as you said, when we say Iran today, we say 2/3 of Iraq, what used to be Iraq. We say about 60% of Syria. We say Lebanon, Hezbollah. We say Yemen, Houthis. And now that President Trump is about to meet with President Putin, and we hear talks about the formula regarding Syria, the future Syria, that is expected to come out of that meeting, what would you like, what would Israel like that formula to be?
Well, what's interesting, Alon, if you ask 100 Israelis what they would like to see in Syria, you will get 100 different answers.
On an issue.
If you, specifically on this one, if you ask 100 Israelis what they don't want to see in Syria, you're going to get the same answer.
No Iran.
We don't want to see Iran have a permanent presence in Syria and to establish essentially a third terror front against Israel. They have Hezbollah. They cooperate with the terror organizations in Gaza, and now they would establish another permanent base, land base, sea base, air bases in Syria. We don't want to see that happen. We are not against a U.S.-Russian agreement at all. In fact, we were arguing for this for years, that there should be.
And no Iran in Syria is attainable from the Trump-Putin meeting?
Well, I think the question is this a U.S. interest? I think it clearly is. Is it a Russian interest? I think it is. They may not state it publicly, but I think that it's actually a clear interest of theirs as well. I don't think they have any reason to see Iran. The question is, what are you going to do on the ground? And the concern that we had as the United States was rightfully going and taking care of ISIS in Syria is that as they did that, Iran and Soleimani would rush into Syria and take over large swaths of the territory in Syria. But I think that the president's speech, understand, the president's speech just didn't deal with the nuclear deal with Iran. He has shifted American policy rather dramatically from containment to prevention on the nuclear side, but essentially from accommodation to rolling back Iran on the regional side. And there are a lot of tools that they have in their arsenal to affect that. And it's not just sanctions tools, like the Treasury sanctioning the IRGC. There are other things that the United States can do. But we welcome that policy, and we would welcome an agreement between the United States and Russia that would make clear that the goal is to remove Iran, and then would start working on the ground to make sure that that actually happens.
I think Prime Minister Netanyahu is the Western leader that has the best access to the Kremlin. I think he sees President Putin way more frequent than he sees President Trump. How is it viewed in the US? How do the Americans treat this relationship that we have with the Russians?
I think they're fine with it, actually. They understand that Russia is in the region. They understand what Israel's interests are. I think they respect it. The U.S. has many issues with Russia that have nothing to do with Israel in Ukraine and elsewhere around the world. And so they understand that when you have the Russians in Syria and we want to ensure that our planes don't run into their planes, that there's a need for the Prime Minister to go to Moscow and speak to President Putin. I have never, as ambassador, neither the previous administration or this administration, seen a great deal of pushback from the fact that we have a good relationship with Russia and that our interests are well served by ensuring that we don't have misunderstandings. That said, I don't think the U.S. is under any illusions, and they shouldn't be under any illusions, that we have one great ally in the world, and that's the United States of America.
And finally, and briefly, if you can, because we're signaled to wrap up.
Please wrap up. Yes, I see.
We are looking at the efforts of the current administration to map the interests of Israelis and Palestinians and perhaps locate a zone of possible agreement between us and them. Looking at the changing Middle East, with all those new allies that Israel has, with all those new partnerships that we have in the Sunni world, recognizing that we perhaps have the most friendly administration in the White House and the friendliest that we're going to have in years. Is the coming year a time of opportunity to use all these conditions to reach some kind of understanding with the Palestinians?
I think it's definitely a time of opportunity. I have to tell you that I am more optimistic than I have ever been at the prospects for reconciliation with the broader region, and we'll have to see if that's also going to be true with the Palestinians. I was opposed to Oslo. I was opposed to the disengagement. But as I said, I'm more optimistic now because I see a change in the region. The Arab governments are in a different place than they were 5 years ago, certainly 10 years or 15 years ago, because they see our interests as being aligned with theirs. You know, there was an Arab Peace Initiative in 2002. But that initiative, I saw it more as a PR exercise at the time. Don't forget, that's a few months after 9/11. You have 15 Saudis that were in that plane that killed all those Americans. They were under, the whole alliance between Saudi Arabia and the United States was under tremendous stress. And then they invited a reporter who was doing his job and went to Saudi Arabia and got the peace plan, but it wasn't based on any sort of strategic interests that the Saudis had. I think now that has changed because you have the rise of Iran. You have ISIS, the rise of ISIS, the militant Sunni fanaticism, which was, let's say, Al-Qaeda 2.0, and there'll probably be a 3.0. So they see these grave dangers in the region, and then they have a strong perception in the last few years, before the Trump administration came in, of America's withdrawal from the region. And, you know, if you see this Iranian tiger and this ISIS leopard, and all of a sudden the 800-pound gorilla leaves the building, you know, they look around and they see a corner, a 250-pound gorilla with a kippah on, and they say, wait a second, maybe we should work with them on dealing with common enemies. So I think that's real. Now, how do you translate that into effective peace process is very difficult because those same governments have essentially poisoned their citizens for 70 years against Israel, against Jews, against Christians, sometimes against America. So it's very hard for them to simply pivot. While they're not democracies, public opinion is relevant. But they are in a different place, and I would say that there is a desire now on the parts of leading Arab governments to come into a stronger relationship, even public relationship, with Israel. Many things are happening underneath the surface. Many remarkable things that are happening, and I give great credit to the Prime Minister who doesn't discuss it. Because if he did, he would ruin the effort. And I think he would prevent us from maybe trying to achieve this historic change. But I do think that it's possible, and I think when you have very strong support in Washington, when they see, the leading powers in the Arab world also see strong support in Washington, they might be able to surface this, and if they can, that in itself would be historic, but it also could have an impact on the Palestinian world, because right now the Palestinians unfortunately have not crossed this historic Rubicon to recognize the one and only Jewish state. We just celebrated last week the Balfour Declaration. We marked 100 years of Balfour, and the Palestinians are wanting to sue Great Britain for the Balfour Declaration. That's a Jewish national home. So they're not ready yet to accept the Jewish state. But if the Arab governments are, then I think that will put enormous pressure on the Palestinians to decide whether or not they want to waste another century or they want to work with Israel on building a better future. I hope that they'll make the latter choice.
All right, with that optimistic observation of a year of opportunities ahead, I want to thank you very much, Ambassador Dermer.
Thank you. And thank you to the IAC. Thank you.